Okay, for this topic, we're going to get into how anthropologists actually study gender, right? So last topic, we looked at a little bit of the biological anthropology perspectives by looking at primate behavior. We looked at how archaeologists examine gender, and now we're looking at kind of anthropology more broadly and focusing on part of the anthropological perspective, which is fieldwork or ethnography. So we're going to briefly review what ethnography is. Then you have two films that I've asked you to watch. Well, actually it's three because there's two about Zora Neale Hurston. But there's three films relating to two extremely important early anthropologists. And I've highlighted two female anthropologists, which I think is fitting. And also because it'll explain some topics we're going to talk about later on in the term regarding inequities. And we've kind of talked about this a little bit when we talked about how female archaeologists are often invisible in narratives of the development of archaeology, but also how the role women played in the past is also often hidden or made invisible as well. But what I want to spend most of my time talking about is not so much the ethnography piece, nor the examples of ethnography as provided by the work of Mead and Hurston. Instead, what I want to focus on a little bit is some of the effects of fieldwork, including the production of anthropological knowledge. Okay, so remember that the anthropological perspective is contains four key pieces. We have holism, cultural relativism, participant observation or fieldwork, and ethnology or cross-cultural comparison. And so this week we're looking at anthropological fieldwork or ethnography. So I've provided you with some definitions here and some background information on that. Again, comparing it with ethnology, which is the cross-cultural comparison of societies, ethnography is the study of individual societies. Okay. Then I've provided a little bit of background information about the marvelous Margaret Mead, clearly one of the most important early anthropologists, not just because of the fieldwork she did, but because of how she disseminated the results of her research. But she, as you'll learn about, is clearly also not a figure that did not experience or have her own share of controversy. The reason why Mead is important to talk about, not just as an example of an ethnographer, of an early ethnographer, but also because she's one of the first anthropologists to really look at gender, age, and culture and how they intersect. And so in the film Margaret Mead Coming of Age, we're having you look at the work that she did. So here's the film review questions and the link for that. We'll talk about those tomorrow or in our Collaborate session. Then I've provided you a little bit of background information, and this is complementary to what you're reading in the chapter 2. So not chapter 2 from our textbook, but a PDF from another textbook on gender in a globalizing world. And in that chapter, it gives you a little bit of the history of feminist thought in anthropology and how it impacted anthropological practice. It also provides a little bit more information on Margaret Mead and as well as Nora Hurston, so please review those concepts. I talk a little bit about the Margaret Mead controversy or the Mead-Freeman controversy, and I use this to highlight how sexism has impacted basically the range and the reputation of female anthropologists and how their the anthropological knowledge they've produced has been understood and framed in academia as well as in the public eye. So then I go a bit into the reflexive approach, which was pioneered by Margaret Mead. And this is a really important concept, right? It's this idea that how we produce anthropological knowledge is not an objective process. Instead, what it is it's an intersubjective process or a reflexive approach process that we are constantly thinking about ourselves, who we are, our biases, the knowledge that we're bringing to our fieldwork. We're thinking about the context in which we are doing our fieldwork. So not just the culture that we are living in and studying, but all of the larger structures that are influencing the culture at that time. We're thinking about how our own experiences shape our understanding of what went on during a fieldwork period. So fieldwork doesn't end, well, fieldwork might end. How we think about that work that we did, the data we collected and stuff is not closed at that point, right? It's open-ended. It also acknowledges, as I state here, that the knowledge that we produce is limited, right? It's limited by who we are and the questions we're able to ask, the people we're able to interact with, but also basically what we are able to experience. So we have to recognize that the observations we make are situated, right? That they're occurring in that particular context, right? They represent that culture at that time and that place. And they do a good job of talking about this in the Margaret Mead film, about her returning to her field site many decades later and how her observations and interpretations of her early work changed. And it also means that we then have to avoid generalizations, right? That what we see during a single field work, kind of duration doesn't reflect the culture as a whole, nor it over time as well. So we have to consider all these different factors then that are part of the context of the research that we undertake. Then I wanted to talk about, or I'm having you learn a little bit about the work of Zora Neale Hurston, who is another early anthropologist. She studied alongside Mead. She was mentored by Franz Boas, the father of American anthropology, who also played a critical role in our discipline as a whole. And so I wanted to highlight a person of color. So Zora Neale Hurston is a early African-American or Black folklorist. And so I wanted to highlight some of the work she did and use this to illustrate, again, this idea of reflexivity and how important who the anthropologist is on understanding the work they produced, right? So Hurston's experience as a Black American, as a person of color, as a woman, as an educated African-American, right? Going back to her communities, going back and studying adjacent communities, how these, basically how all of her work was shaped by who she was, right? And also about how there has been critique around her work, just like Mead's. And so I want you to think about, why are the work of these female anthropologists so heavily critiqued? So a couple of questions about the first video that kind of summarizes her work and her contribution. Then I just have another small video I want you to watch that, as I mentioned here, is just footage of Hurston's fieldwork. And I want you to compare it with the footage of Margaret Mead's fieldwork that is highlighted in her coming of age, or in the coming of age documentary. And so then I want you to kind of consider, what are the similarities and differences in terms of how the anthropology was being done, in terms of how it was captured, right? So what does the film tell us about the kinds of questions that were being asked, what was being recorded, and overall just the kind of process of doing anthropology. And then I talk a little bit about how autoethnography, basically what Hurston was doing, is a little bit different from the kind of so-called traditional ethnography of Margaret Mead. So this is what I wanted to talk a little bit more, and this is why I'm having you watch my TEDx talk about fieldwork, is that one of the things we focus on when we talk about fieldwork is the production of anthropological knowledge, right? Is the insights we gain into other cultures through it. But we also have to understand that what we do as anthropologists impacts the communities in which we work. And so if we think about our informants themselves, people who participate in our fieldwork with us, who are sharing their knowledge with us, there can be a disruption of their understanding of their self and the world through this participation, because they may be curious, like, why are you asking this question? Why do you find this interesting? Oh, I never thought about it this way. There can be economic gain or loss. And so there's a picture of a goat here. This was a goat that we purchased for the community that we were working in. We also paid workers. And what we found out later on was that the price of goats in the area had actually increased in response to us being there. That basically they were charging us and people who were working for us, so people that everyone knew had basically was getting extra sources of income, more for a goat. So we were actually creating a situation where, yes, individuals were experiencing economic gain by being hired by us as participants in our fieldwork, but then also were then being charged more at the marketplace because everyone knew that they had this basically financial windfall. And so this can also then change or create a change in the status of those individuals as well, how they're perceived of by their community members, either positively or negatively. As anthropologists, we're also impacted by the research. So this is why I wanted you to look at my TEDx talk where I talk about my experience of being accused of witchcraft while doing work in Tanzania and how this impacted and shaped the work I now do in that region. But it's not all kind of doom and gloom stories when we think about the effects of fieldwork. Fieldwork is an incredible experience, and it can be experiencing the others. So being in another culture, participating in their events and their experiences, their life way is really fulfilling and rewarding. It allows us to grasp better what it means to be human, right, from this cross-cultural perspective. And it really just illustrates the importance of being present in communities, of just being there, of just sitting there and observing what is going on. We became quite active in the communities that we do fieldwork in Tanzania. So there's some images here of us delivering educational materials to schools, of us working with some of the local kids who would just drop by our archaeological site to eat candy and snacks with us, but also were amazing field archaeologists too. They became really great at finding beads for us at our one site, which was fantastic. And so it kind of brought us all together, and we were able to build a community that was really a positive and uplifting experience. But we also have to talk about the production of anthropological knowledge itself. And so I go into explaining the work of Rabinow and Agar below, talking about how, again, fieldwork is this open-ended, ongoing process that even after we leave the field, we still have to think about what we did, why we did it, and what we've understood. We have to think about the relationships that we're building with our informants so that we can attempt to understand them, but also have to acknowledge that there's points in which we will not be able to understand what is going on. And so we have to be critical then about those points. What is going on? What is creating the tension? Why am I not understanding this? Is it because of who I am? Is it because of the questions I ask? What are the larger, again, concepts or processes or institutions that are impacting the kind of work that is being done? Okay, so again, this video is just meant to be a very brief introduction to these concepts. We'll spend some more time talking about the film review questions in our Collaborate session this week. And this is just as a reminder, the last topic that will be covered on your midterm exam for next week as well. So take care.